How are you?
All right, good to know you're still there with us. You will recall that the Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency had earlier warned that the rains for this year would wreak havoc. And of course, it is already wreaking havoc because there has been flooding across some parts of the country, particularly some states, the flashpoints and all of it. And that's why we will be looking critically at the aftermath of rainfall, the flooding, the havoc being wreaked in homes and farmland. And to do this, we have joining us a climate change expert, Dr. John Osonwa. He is an adjunct professor of the environmental law who also lectured in different parts of the country, most recently University of Abuja. You're welcome to the studio.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
And also joining Dr. Osonwa is a convener Plateau Heritage Movement, Magna Yusuf Wamil. You're welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
Let me start with Dr. Osonwa. Your assessment of the damage or the devastation caused by flood across the country. At the last count, NHIS, that's the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, released 15 states affected so far, and that more states will be affected. Your assessment?
Well, I think it's been pretty severe this year since we had the catastrophic flooding in 2012. We've seen a lull in activity, but this year there has been a resurgence, and I think it's what we are witnessing is more than normal flooding. This year we've seen some deaths, we've seen some devastation across the landscape. So I think it's more than what we have seen in the past few years, certainly.
Okay. You have a personal experience. You come from a community that has been devastated. I mean, best description is that community is underwater. There's a number of displaced persons as a result. Can you narrate the exact, story of the people living there?
Okay, I come from Mangu local government of Plateau State, and precisely August 5th, we had this incident of flood in Panyam district of that local government. It's a riverine kind of flood where farmlands on the floodplains were affected. So we are not talking of an urban kind of flooding where people are displaced really. So we are looking at farmlands affecting over 130 different farmers. And that story is not in the news. It's something that is baffling for me, and it is something that I hope to change today. The devastation is quite immense. We're looking at possible food shortages in shortest possible time, because of course a lot of these farmers, over 130 of them, will not be harvesting this year. And then you have also the psychological trauma, being that farming is business. People have invested money, they've invested time, these crops have fully grown, and then now
what range of crops are we talking about?
Corn, maize, precisely. Okay. Yeah, and then in Kombun district of the same local government, on the same day, we had hailstorm. And this one affecting over 280, precisely 288 farmers. Maize plantations, beans plantations, completely destroyed by hailstorm. And all of this is not in the news.
Following your narration, it's obvious that the situation in Panyam and other communities in Mangu local government area is quite serious. So it's clear that there is a humanitarian crisis in that region right now. So what has SEMA as well as NEMA done?
Yeah, on the 8th of August, the councillors representing those two districts were able to get NEMA and SEMA to the affected areas, and that is pretty much all that has been done. They've been there, they've taken reports, and they've given assurance. They've spoken with community leaders, victims of these disasters, politically, talk to them about how to handle the issue to prevent high blood pressure, trauma, depression, and all of that. That's all for now.
What form of intervention did they, commit themselves to?
There is no intervention. It's just that visit. And they are the only people who have been there, the only agencies of government who have been there. No representative apart from those two councillors. The governor hasn't been there. The senator representing the zone only issued a statement. The member House of Representatives representing Mangu Bokos has not been there.
I was actually coming to that point as to what strategies has the government in Plateau State done to remedy the situation, because I understand that it is not Panyam, it's not only peculiar to Panyam district alone, but other communities in Plateau are being affected.
Yes, precisely in Pangshin, in Chip District, there was flooding there too, but the member representing Pangshin, Kanke Kanam, was there. He saw it and he promised to take it up to the floor of the National Assembly. That's the only government attention that we have seen. There is no statement from Plateau State government. There is no activity at all. There is no plan for intervention. What we are doing as sons and daughters of Plateau State and of Mangu local government is to organize ourselves, which is something that I am doing right now, to mobilize humanitarian support, disaster relief, and we are still at the moment of mobilization. We haven't really deployed anything.
Is this a recurring disaster? Is it recurring? Is it the first time this is happening, or is it an annual disaster?
It's not annual. It's not annual, but I do not have the relevant data to know really. I would depend on NIMET.
I understand that. You are from that community. I'm asking you, as someone from that community, if this is the first time these communities will be experiencing this kind of devastation.
No, we do not have that record right now. In recent times, at least, until this one.
Okay. Dr. Osonwa.
Yes, sir.
Couldn't this destruction have been avoided? Could it have been avoided in any way? What steps do you think the state or federal government should take to avert the disaster?
Well, I have been stressing that we all understand that flooding is a natural phenomenon. But the kind of flooding that we're seeing all over the world, not just in Nigeria, is attributable to some global climate change factors. And when you look at what is happening globally, you now find that we are going to have more severe flooding, more severe weather events. That's usually the outcome of climate change. And if you look all over the world, we are seeing massive hurricanes, record-breaking heat waves. We are seeing flooding in places where we haven't seen massive flooding like this. So what we need to do is to understand, first of all, that this is going to be a recurring phenomenon for us. This most likely will be happening more often now, because there are other factors that we didn't have before. We have Arctic ice has melted, over half of Arctic ice has melted, and it has raised the sea levels, which feeds into our rivers. So that tends to overwhelm the dams that we have in some of these areas. When the dams are overwhelmed, they flood. You also have some of the things that we're doing in terms of managing our environment: indiscriminate dumping of refuse, clogging of drainage systems with plastics and other things. So those things contribute to flooding. The other thing too is climate change is contributing, particularly in the northern area where you come from. The ground is becoming desertified. It's becoming so hard, almost like concrete. So it has lost its natural ability to absorb water. So what happens now is when it rains, even a little bit of rain, you will have flash flooding, because the ground doesn't absorb the water the way it should. So those are some of the factors we need to be aware of. This is going to be, I said this in 2012,
so how do we mitigate this impact on farmlands, on communities?
The first point of mitigation is what we're doing here. It's public awareness, and I applaud what you people do periodically to bring about this kind of discussion. People need to be aware that flooding is going to become a part of their lives. Those, you will find that sometimes people are living in drainage areas. They are living in flood plains that are not fit for human habitation, particularly along the river banks. Those people, if you have been habitually flooded, 2, 3, 4 times, there's no reason to be living in that place. You need to move to higher ground. If you're also witnessing that now your farmlands are being flooded, you need to reassess where you do your farming. Thankfully, in some areas you can do rotational farming. So people need to look at areas that are now prone to flooding and move their farming operations.
What should the government do? Because you're taking the responsibility now to the people, which is understandable, but the government, what kind of sustainable measure should they put in place to encourage this kind of practice you're talking about, sustainable farming, sustainable infrastructure?
First thing government needs to do, we need to look at our dam management and dam infrastructure. In some areas, the reason we're having flooding is because we don't have the dams that we're supposed to have, particularly in the northern area. We have a situation where Cameroon has built its own counterpart dams, and when you have a huge amount of water in the dam, they have to release the water. Now, we don't have our own counterpart dam in Nigeria. It's been in the works since the 1980s.
That should be on River Benue. That's in outside.
Yes, that whole Taraba Benue axis. We don't have the dam, so that contributes to flooding in that whole region. The other thing that government needs to do is, even the dams that we have, they are not being maintained properly. They are filled with sand and silt. You're supposed to desilt your dams almost every year. Well, a lot of the dams only have about 40% holding capacity. So that also increases the frequency of flooding in those areas. So government also needs to enforce.
Good points. Government also needs to enforce. You would also recall that in spite of warnings by the Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency for governments, in particularly the 15 prone states, to take precaution, I think not even 5 have even taken giant steps to see that these issues are mitigated. But let's come back to Panya. A lot you have said, but what exactly do you want for your people?
Well, we are devastated as it is. Mangu local government, which brags of a very large market for maize in the whole of this country, being that Nigeria as it is, if not the highest or the largest producer of maize in Africa, and we contribute a whole lot into that percentage and statistics. We want a situation in Mangu local government where people will be aware of what has happened to us. Beyond that awareness, we want a situation where government will step in to know that really in Plateau State we are not only talking about killings here and there, because I'm pretty sure that if unknown gunmen, as it were to have killed someone, it would have been in the news. We are human beings too. We are also faced with these challenges, and that we are somehow abandoned is something that is quite unfortunate. So we want government to come in. Our case is not urban. Most of the things that the expert has said may not really apply to us, because we are farmers and the affected areas are largely farmlands.
How do you mean you're farmers and you're not affected? Because when we talk about flooding in this country, we actually quantify the number of farmlands that have been lost in the process of the flood, which of course includes the one in your
what
location.
I'm saying is most of the solution or the mitigation that he has said are really for urban areas where you have retention dams. We do not have that. I said earlier that this is a bit of a new experience for us in Mangu local government.
Do you receive weather information? Does your community receive weather information?
That's the issue. We don't. There is interagency collaboration between Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, NIMET, and National Orientation Agency. I do not know. I know that there is an NOA office in Mangu local government, but I don't know how many staff they have, and I'm not sure that the manpower they have is sufficient.
You said NEMA was in your community.
Yes.
NEMA is also part of the stakeholders in terms of disseminating some of this weather information. They also have, they collaborate with NIMET, NISA. Do you think that perhaps your community isn't aware enough to approach these agencies to demand for, better information?
I'll tell you this. These natural disasters occurred, the two of them, the hailstorm and the flood, occurred on the 5th of August. And by 8th of August, 3 days later, local people, inspired by councillors, 2 councillors, mobilized, brought SEMA and NEMA to those communities. So the awareness is there.
Okay.
But whether we are the ones to reach out for information or the relevant agencies are to reach us with information is the crux of the matter.
Of course, and I also understand that the extent of damage has been caused on the farmers and of course the residents in that communities. I think I also know that many of the houses built in that community are built of mud.
Yeah.
So is it now a periodic thing that every rainy season these people would have to evacuate?
No, it's not. It hasn't been this severe. What we have around Mangwale axis, where you have a bridge there, I think last year there was a flood, but it wasn't severe. I think only one wall to a building was washed away. So it's a new experience for us. At least now we know that around those axes there's possibility every other rainy season that this would happen.
How can we hold the government accountable? How can your people draw the government to that access to see that these issues become a thing of the past?
At the risk of sounding immodest, I think that there isn't the will on the part of our people, those who have resources, who have a space at the table to call attention of government, to hold government accountable. That is why young people like me are coming up to say, oh, this has to change.
Right.
Yes. So that is what we are doing largely. And I've reached out to so many of them, and some have obliged and some have clearly told me they want to be left alone. And it is sad. People need those of our people who are rich, who have wealth, who have extensive contacts to come to our aid.
All right, Doctor. The intervention of government at this point.
Yes. I think government needs to be proactive, and when we talk about government, we need to look at the 3 tiers of government. It is always more expensive to face the kind of catastrophic damage we're seeing here in terms of displaced lives. Sometimes we have deaths, and then you have lost productivity, you have lost revenue from whatever would have come out of the farms, and it affects our food security across the country. So I think governments should be proactive. Now we know that this community is prone to flooding. I don't expect to see a repeat next year. There are also things that the community can do in partnership with government. You can build sand barriers in some areas. Just using cement, filling it with sand, build some barriers. It will buffer the flooding to some extent, so you don't have washed out farmlands. But I think we need to understand at all levels that flood is going to be part of our narrative now.
Dr. John Osonwa, an adjunct professor of environmental law, lectured in different parts of the world, including University of Abuja. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Magna Yusuf Wamiel, Plateau, convener Plateau Heritage Movement. Thank you for telling us your story.
You're welcome.
We will also have another interview. This time we will be focusing on the humanitarian crisis in Nigeria. Do stay with us.